Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Christopher Kraus, your Learning and Development Specialist at Embraer, and I want to welcome you to our remote learning webinar. This week's topic is managing your email. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker in just a minute, but first, let me go through some light housekeeping. All right, here we go. So it looks like everybody's doing this, so great, thank you. Muting your microphones and disabling your video. We are going to do some questions at the end of the session, and we're going to try to do it through group chat. I think we've got a large group of people here, but we'll see how that goes at the end. But for right now, we're going to do the chat feature we'll use for the Q&A. But we will have time at the end of the session for questions. Just a reminder, the session is being recorded, and we do that so that for those employees that are not able to attend in real time, we always have that recording available to them on Empower about an hour after the session ends. And as always, after the webinar, we will have a survey. We always like to get your feedback on the topic and hear from you what topics you'd like to see in the future. So you're going to have a QR code at the end of this session. You can just use your phone, open the camera, point it to your screen, and the QR code will automatically start the survey on your phone. Or if you'd rather, I'll send out a link afterwards. You can do it that way too. So with that, let me introduce our guest speaker. I'm really excited to have him back. Alan Bernstein is the owner and chief HR consultant for HR Office Savers based in Melbourne. And Alan, if you all remember, was a huge help for us in the very beginning of these webinars. Back in May, he was our guest speaker for a few of them in May and June. And we're really excited to have him back. He's got more than 25 years of HR time under his belt. He's been a frontline and executive levels, senior certified HR professional with SHRM, and the president-elect of the Space Coast HRA, the Melbourne Chamber Ambassador. So, Alan, did that just happen? I see president-elect. So,
yeah.
When do you go full time?
January 1st.
Awesome.
So I graduated from vice president to president-elect, and then president in January.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on that. And Alan, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I do want to invite everyone we have our Space Coast HR Association free of charge. We're a nonprofit based on the Space Coast. We meet in Cocoa, and the third Tuesday of every month from 11:30 to 1, we cover various HR topics. So we do from time to time see some folks from all the larger companies around that come visit, and we love to spread the HR word as much as we can. So thanks, Chris, for having me. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Glad to be back. Today I'm going to talk about email management. And I kind of framed it up on this first slide. You know, these are the complaints we hear regularly when we talk about what's up with email. There's too many. People hide behind them for difficult conversations. Why use email when we can make a phone call? Sharing with unintended audiences, reply alls happen too many times, and we BCC, and we'll cover some of that too. Some of them are poorly written, harder to read, copying others unnecessarily, big pet peeve of a lot of us. But there's so many things that we think about with email. So for today, I want to cover really 3 major topics that go into managing your email. So when we think about managing email, we kind of intuitively go to, I've got all these emails in my inbox and I can't keep up and there's too many, and what do I do? And while that's true, it's so much more than that. There's a sending, there's a receiving, there's an understanding of how email operates. So today, I want to spend a little bit of time on each of these 3 topics of communication, etiquette, and then of course best practices managing emails. This is not a Microsoft Office class. I'm not going to teach you all about Outlook. I am going to teach you, though, some of the basics that go into writing a good email, receiving an email that may not be written as well as it should be, and how you do all that and how it becomes email management, because all that leads to managing your email. So the first module we want to talk about is communication. And when you think of communication, we think about different ways we communicate. We think about writing, signs, speech. The imparting or interchange of thoughts is defined by the dictionary. But here's an interesting one I found. In biology, an activity by one organism that changes or has the potential to change the behavior of other organisms. So when we think about communication, we think about how it leads into this topic of managing email. We're going to talk about the written word. Communication takes place via fax, email, written word. Fax not so much anymore, but written. But look at all the other ways we think about communicating: verbal, paraverbal, nonverbal. They all feed into written communication and how we want to try to communicate better through email. I want you also to think about, when we do communication, the factors that go into communication. You've got the method. So is it person to person, telephone, email? In this case, it's fax. So we want to think about what that means for communicating. Email, communicating through email. The number of people receiving the message. Is it a big group email to the entire department? Is it a small group of just your team? Is it one-to-one? These are different factors that go into. And then, of course, the audience is included in all of that. Is it the team? Are you closer to these folks? Is it a personal email? Are you sending a complaint note to a service provider that hasn't done what they're supposed to? These are the different pieces of emails that we want to think about that help you manage your email. Because if you think about, every email you write is prone to a 3x return. So you send one, you get 3 back. So for every one you write, if you're intentional about how you write the email and where you write the email, you can help manage the response of the email into your inbox, which of course is one of our biggest complaints, is what do we do with our inbox? I also want to talk about the 4 levels of conversation, just touch on it, because this also goes to how we think about writing emails and what goes into emails. And so we have the small talk. I want to talk about creating an effective introduction, because when we talk about the 4 levels of conversation, we talk about preparing our emails and getting ourselves into a conversation. We want to know, we want to be able to talk to folks in a way in email that might be as projected in person, sometimes better. But you know, your emails, they create their own tone. And whenever you write something, it creates its own tone, its own discussion. People kind of read into it. They take a snapshot of what that last conversation might have been. So as you think about projecting warmth and confidence, hi, how are you? Right? You open with an introduction. You state your first and your last name. And when the other person's given their name, repeat an acknowledgement. I want to tell you why this is important to do in email, not just in conversation. So when you meet someone and you say, hi, Chris, I'm Alan. Chris will say, hi, Alan, I'm Chris. And we might have a formal handshake and introduction. But in email, I would encourage you to think about doing that also, especially when you're working outside of your internal chain at Embraer. So in Embraer, you have your own auto sigs and you have your name on your email. But do you know what your email looks like when it's received by someone else? I received an email last night from a potential client that all it came from was R space R. And I had no idea who that was, what it was. There was no auto signature. There was no real context. It was, I'm getting back to you about the phone call you sent me yesterday. Please call me back. And that was not helpful. So I had to reply and ask for more information, which of course you do. But you want to think about what your emails look like. And so if you come in with, hi, this is Alan, I got your information from so-and-so, even though my name might be there and it might be redundant, it really helps with the introductions. I want to talk about the written letter a little bit. We're going to go through this quickly because the written letter really is about how you handwrite. But I included this today for email discussion because I know that in my world, and I'm assuming in most other worlds that I've seen anyway, we don't just do an attachment. We might write an opening on the email sometimes, and especially in the executive side of the world, we would oftentimes attach something and copy and paste that same text in the attachment, depending on who we were sending it to, especially if it was to a vendor supplier or our group of subordinates. So it's important in the written letter you think about the different types. You've got your thank you notes, which should be short, 3 or 4 sentences. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate you sharing with me all the details of the training program we're going to do. I really enjoyed learning more about thank you notes. Thank you. So something that's simple, to the point, explains a little bit more what you're trying to accomplish. Formal letters, of course, are in the name formal. You want to, dear Mr. Kraus, thank you very much for bringing me in today. Let me share with you a little bit more what I'm going to talk about. And you might have 2 or 3 paragraphs about the conversation or about what we're going to talk about. But when you do the emails, remember that those emails should be the same kind of contextually anyway, as you would handwrite a letter to someone on formal letterhead, or think about how that might come across when they receive it. And of course, you have your informal letters, which have different tones. They're a little bit more, they're a little bit less wordy usually, and they can be abbreviations and a little bit more to the point. But I want everyone to remember that regardless of what you're emailing, that's in an area that can easily get forwarded even by mistake. So we try not to forward information from other people that could be confidential or proprietary, or at least private. But sometimes that happens. So when you do an email, remember that that's out there and that can be forwarded. I want to spend a few minutes now on STAR, S-T-A-R, situation, task, action, result. This is something that we teach in a lot of behavioral programs, soft skills training. We teach it when we teach people how to do interviews. Chris and I were talking about this just yesterday. It's been around for quite a long time. So if you know what STAR is, that's fantastic. Hopefully this will just be a refresher. But if you're not familiar with STAR, then this might be a way that you can learn how to communicate, whether it's in writing or verbally, that creates a more direct and impactful message. So here's what STAR is. STAR is, you think about the situation, the task, the action, the result. And it's the who, what, where, when, why, how of communicating. Situation is the where, the who, and the when. And you want this to be one sentence. So what's the situation? On Friday, I delivered a webinar to the employees in Embraer. Situation, that's what I did. The task, you want to briefly state what your task was. Again, not much more than one sentence. I included information on communication, etiquette, and best practices. And then you get into the action. What resolved the problem, or what was the action? What was the action? What did you actually do? I created a 40-slide presentation to review these different aspects and hopefully educate some folks on some things they may not have heard before, or even refresh them on some new things. Again, a single sentence, maybe two sentences, but you want to keep it tight. And then your result, which we don't know the result of today, but we'll see the survey later. So the result could be, and it turned out the information was extremely relevant and everyone on the call really enjoyed themselves, and the feedback was 5 out of 5 all the way through. So as you think about telling the story, now of course there's more. You can ask me lead-in questions or follow-up questions and we can get deeper. But when you're writing, you want to write to the point, so that when you're relaying the information, you're giving that in a box to whoever's receiving it, and then they can dive in further if they wish. So if everyone wants, and we're not going to do the exercise now, but think about it for today. Think about you're talking to your boss, or you're talking to a peer, or you're explaining something to a significant other or a friend. What was the highlight of the week? How was the webinar today? Try to frame it up with STAR. 4 to 5 sentences, a situation, a task, an action, and a result. And if you kind of do that and practice it, you should see, as you do more of it, it becomes easier to do, and it also helps you get your point across, and you get to articulate in your mind anyway what you're trying to accomplish. So let's move on now to Module 2. We're going to talk about etiquette and civility. And this is a really important topic for writing because people can't see you. They think they can see you when you write, and they have a picture of you when they read what you wrote. And if you're honest with yourself, you do the same thing. You see something that comes through, your context is, if there is a pre-context, then you know where that came from. You had a conversation, it's a follow-up email. But let's say there's not. Let's say you get a request from another department, or you get some kind of notification from the city that they're going to have to shut off your water Monday for a few hours. I mean, you get these notes. And if you think about what it means to write a note with good etiquette and also to read a note with civility, it helps you take some of the emotion out of it and just be more objective with the entire communication process. So let's just ground ourselves on uncivil behavior. There's bad body language, there's gossiping, there's bullying, there's not listening to someone if they have something to say. There's also poor etiquette dealing with correspondence. So if you take it just as simple as ignoring a phone call, or, and nobody on this meeting, of course, did this, but let's say you signed up to attend and you didn't. You didn't tell Chris you weren't coming. You didn't let anyone know you couldn't come. You simply decided, I'm not coming. That's bad etiquette. So you've signed up to do something, you didn't do it, which means you're not being truthful in your approach. So think about how you go about your day-to-day with what you do, and then you can kind of have that grace for people that also make those mistakes, because anything can happen. So we try not to judge. We just want to be civil and have good etiquette with everything we do. I also want you to remember, when you receive an email, you may be dealing with some difficult personalities, or you may be the difficult personality as you send an email that you need to clarify something that was not clear, and maybe you're not using the kindest of language or the kindest of tone. Even though it's in writing, your tone can come across. So think about difficult personalities. Think about recognizing the need that, if you're somebody who has to ask your coworkers regularly about something, or if your coworker comes to you regularly to ask you about something, at some point that becomes an annoyance. And how do you deal with difficult personalities? And that's where civility comes back. You can't control other people, but you can control yourself. So if you translate that to your emails and how you receive emails and how you send them, it helps you to ground yourself on the quote too many emails unquote, or the don't have time to respond mentality. You just kind of take it as a whole, and you can hopefully appreciate what other people are going through. I want to talk a little bit about etiquette, which is slightly different than civility. And etiquette can be complicated. There's so many different pieces to it, but we're going to touch on it when it comes to business etiquette in particular. And it's important to have good etiquette, good calm grounding, and politeness, and of course civility being a part of etiquette.
Alan, I think we may have lost you again. All right, hold tight, everybody.
Hi there, this is Alan. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you're kind of low. The volume's low.
Chris, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now. And now I can't. Hold tight, everybody. Okay, Alan, can we hear you now?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
All righty. So now I'm on my phone. Did I lose the sharing too, or can you still see my screen?
No, I can't see the screen. Can you reshare?
Yep. Am I up?
No, not yet. You might have to log in again on your computer too.
Let me do that. And while I'm doing that, I can also continue, and then when it comes back up.
You know, the other thing I could do is I've got your latest PowerPoint on.
Right,
I can just share it. You can just tell me when
okay.
to. All right, so 1 second.
I'll say next slide 20 times.
Yeah, perfect. That's fine.
Okay, thanks.
And
We're on
All
slide
right,
22 when you get there.
Slide 22. Is it the importance of business etiquette? Is that where we are?
Understanding, yes, that's it.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we're just touching on the importance of business etiquette so we can appreciate that as we communicate via email, this does get live. This is somebody seeing it, whether it's internal, external, and keeping that in mind is a really important piece about how we continue to manage our email communication. Let's go to the next slide, Chris. We're going to talk about effective work etiquette. And then we're going to skip over to what that looks like with the different aspects of greetings and long-term relationships. But the promotion of civility and etiquette starts with all of this basic workplace etiquette. And so if you go to the next slide with greetings, this is where we talk about, and I touched on this earlier when we send emails and we say, "Dear Mr. Kraus," or "Hi, Chris," or "Hey, buddy." There's different types of formal, informal, and different processes. I want everyone to understand, though, that emails, just like a hello to someone, it's always appropriate to begin an email with hello, or good morning, or good afternoon, or if it's less formal, it's a hi, or hey is sometimes appropriate. But don't forget that in business settings, and Ember Air is no different, rank and professionalism matter. So you want to make sure that you're always sensitive to the power dynamics in your organization when offering greetings. So if your supervisor or the head of the group or whoever it is that you're addressing hasn't made it clear about what to call them, they are Mr. or Ms. or whatever the appropriate title is. There's no nicknames. There's no assuming certain things. It can really, from a career perspective, but also a simple ethics, civility, and process, you want to make sure that who you're addressing is in line with that level of familiarity. And as we think about what that looks like, I mean, I've seen it. I don't know if you all have seen it on the call, but I've seen these times where folks are way too familiar. And you want to be careful what that can come across, especially in writing, because they can't see you. Next slide. Respect, of course, active listening, coworkers' property, space, time. If you're looking at an email and you don't absolutely need to send it, don't, because you also want to remember.
All right. Sounds like we're having issues with the slides.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can hear you fine.
Okay. Hold on one second because we're having issues now with the slides. Hold on. Boy, it is not our day for technical, technical smooth. Good Lord.
This is why we send planes.
Let's see if we can do this again. All right. Can somebody let me know which slide they see right now?
Back.
Respect.
Respect. Okay, great.
All right. Let's skip to the next one. Then, Chris, let's go to involvement. So being part of having good business etiquette when it comes to emails and communication and process also includes being involved. If you get and you have to use some judgment here, of course, but if you receive an email or you're sending an email and there's people within your small group, there's an expectation that everyone within that group at some extent is going to have some input, is going to be involved in the dialogue, is going to have some type of thought. And if you think about if you're a manager and you've got a team of 5 people and you send a group email to your whole team, most likely you're expecting everyone to have, if there is an input expectation, you want everyone to have input. That's why you send it to your team. If you're the recipient of that kind of email, you want to be ready to reply, keeping in mind the etiquette and the civility and the fact that whatever you reply is going to be out there. So watch your grammar, watch your spelling, watch your punctuation. But as you see these emails and on the recipient side, think about how I can help or how can you help? see if it's relevant to you and to doing something in that regard. We're going to go to the next slide, and then we're going to touch specifically on business email etiquette. And we're going to talk about how that is an effective medium to conducting business communication. So the next slide, if you would, Chris, is addressing your message. And this is one that can become really tricky. Most of us that have been writing email for any length of time understand the basics of to, CC, BCC, but there's some nuances in there that may or may not be, that you may not be aware of. So of course, the to field is a direct message to someone. If you're sending to 30 different people, but it's really addressed to a group, maybe you hide the names and you put to the group. Or you want to be kind of clear about who's receiving it, what that message is that they receive. If you go back to what I just said about involvement, if you don't want everyone involved, you may not want to put everybody on the to line. You may want to put some of those folks on the CC line, which is carbon copy. That means that they're informed, but not necessarily need to be involved directly. And then there's the BCC, which is always tricky. So if you've ever been involved in one of those situations where you received an email, you were on the to line, and somebody else was on the BCC line, the blind copy, which you didn't know, of course, because it's a BCC, you don't see it. But then that person on the BCC does a reply all or somehow lets everyone know that they were on the BCC. It's really awkward for the person who sent the message, because BCC is really meant that they don't want people to know that there's somebody else on that message. So be aware when you're doing emails what that really means when you do a BCC and how that can impact the folks that are copied on it and the folks that might also be impacted by knowing or not knowing that there was somebody else on the BCC line. Next slide, Chris, is on grammar and acronyms. So emails, we tend to get a little bit lazy when we write emails. You ever receive an email with misspellings and the word is actually different, right? Manager, manger. Now, obviously there's context involved, but you got to watch what those look like, because the abbreviations and the grammar and the other parts to an email, again, they have context. And if you don't create the context, then somebody will create it for you. So you want to watch out for, on the slide, you see BDW, by the way, in my honest opinion, Laughing Out Loud, which when it first came out, I thought was loving. I don't know. I didn't really know the acronyms all those years ago. But I can tell you that I was in a situation, so here's a real story that can create both a received email that's taken the wrong way and also created a conversation with the employee. They were sending emails. They had started to send emails and they were using abbreviations like by the way, and in my opinion, and others, right? But they also abbreviated follow-up, FOLLOW-UP, as F/U. So imagine when the recipient of that email received that email, they brought that to, they made a question about that. So when you do your emails and you think about what you're putting in there and you look at what you're writing and you want to think about what people are receiving, be extremely cognizant of what that can look like. You know, capitals, when you do something in all caps, that implies you're shouting at someone. If it's too small of a font, they can't read it. So kind of think about what that looks like when people receive it. If you go to the next slide, here are some technology tips we pulled out about messaging and some things that might help. So medium is the message. There are some things that are better done face-to-face rather than through internet or rather than through an email or a text message or a chat. So think about the medium that would make the most sense. There's some thoughts about after 2 or 3 emails, it's better to just pick up the phone and you go back and forth. And if you notice, the more you go back and forth, the shorter, more direct, and less personal your emails get. So you want to be very careful about stuff like that. Always reread your letters and emails before you send them. And when I say reread, read them out loud. Sometimes when you're writing, it doesn't always translate into what you're meaning to say. So when somebody sees your email, they may be reading it differently. So by saying it out loud, you actually hear yourself say it, and that could be something that could be helpful. Think security. Remember, don't assume that privacy is not expected when you do an email. I mean, you might personally expect it, but it's not an expectation. Companies have the right to look at emails and review them, and they can be discoverable if there's some kind of issue, and they can also be forwarded, so be careful. Think about your recipient's convenience. We used to have this way back in the day of Blackberries, where you would have to write an email that was Blackberry friendly that would show up on just a few lines of the screen. So you made that's the star method, actually, if you remember that. So that kind of shortens the email and makes it a little bit more user friendly and readable. Now on iPhones and other types of personal devices, there's different screen sizes. But think about brevity and think about making it easy for the person to receive it. If you don't need to do that 5-page attachment along with a 5-page email, don't. Make it easy for the person. Think about them. Civility, ethics matter. And of course, skip it if it's not necessary. Remember that most emails will go into that PDA. So before sending a message in the late hours, right? You're up at 10:30, you send something to your staff, they happen to see it. Sometimes their reaction is, I got to act on this right away. So be careful about the emails. It can be the blessing and the curse. It's convenient, it's right there, but what happens is people receive it differently. If you go to the next slide, we're going to jump into the third module, which is managing email. So there, I've got a section here on some real practical ways that we can get into the meat of what we want, which is managing our email. How do we handle the numbers of email? I mean, there's 5 billion plus active email accounts sending millions and millions of messages a day. So some of these may be best practices you can implement. If you go to the next slide, organizing your inbox. Many email systems have tools you can use to help sort and organize emails and appointments to go through them easier. Go to a YouTube video, learn about your Outlook, learn if you have Gmail at home or whatever your email of preferences, learn how to use it, learn how to, and I'll cover some of this in archives and orders and some tricks and tools, but you want to learn what you can about how to best utilize and organize your inbox. Something you can do, next slide, is set delivery rules. Emails from your manager's email can be highlighted in yellow. Maybe you've been talking to somebody about this certain project X. You can create an auto filer in your system so that anything that comes up with quote project capital X unquote goes into a certain folder. So there's different ways that you can set delivery rules by subject or folders or certain types of messages. Next slide is about folders and message hierarchy. And this is a little bit more deep than what we just talked about, but there are ways to set up your folders inside your inbox. And you want to be careful about that too, because too many folders can be just as confusing as too many messages in your inbox. But a good folder structure should be in place and ready to use, just like at home or in your office. You've got paper folders, paper files if you have them. You need an order or a system that you can go find stuff. And if you establish the hierarchy among your emails, you can most likely be able to identify the most important messages first, reduces the risk of skimming over something, and you can read and handle something less urgent at a time that's more convenient. Next slide, Chris. Here's a tip that we also pulled out on dealing with email right away. Your inbox, and we do this, I think many of us are culprits here, but our inbox is not meant to be a storage area for messages. We think it is. I mean, many of us, a badge of honor is I just hit 10,000 emails in my inbox, and it's not. That's not a good thing. It's hard to manage. You're missing stuff. You don't know really what's going on every day. You may look at it, and you may save it in your inbox, and you'll think to get back to it later, or maybe it goes away by itself, but it's still clutter. It still creates this obstacle in your everyday to get your job done. So take a few minutes to deal with an email when it comes in. Maybe look at it. If it takes a minute or two to handle it. Even though you have a bunch of other stuff to do, handling that one email at that one moment that really only takes a moment to handle is going to save you tons of time later, and especially with the backlog of emails you might get in your box. Next slide, please, is flagging and highlighting important items. This is an interesting piece. You know, some people live and die by flagging emails. I personally don't. I find that if I start flagging, I overflag, and then I have all these emails that are flagged, and I can't manage that any better than I can emails that aren't flagged. So I do my very best to create these folders and handle emails right away and put my emails in a folder if I need to save it for later. I also print stuff myself, and that's an option you can use. So if I have a document, I will save it in a folder on my computer. And if I need to print it so I have a handy reference, I'll do that. And then I will most usually delete that email because I don't need it anymore. And I want you to think about the flagging and the highlighting of important items, because it's a good thing if you use it well to not lose the ones that are timed for certain delivery. But again, if you overdo it, it creates its own problem, just like too many emails in your inbox. Next slide. You don't have to keep everything. This is something, I mean, when I joked about the thousands and thousands of emails in your inbox, and then maybe you have subfolders. Early on in my career, and I used to play this game where every month I would take whatever emails I got the previous month and just move them to a subfolder that was, email September, or in this case, it would be August 2020. And so I ended up having just as many folders based on the month I got them, which wasn't any easier to manage. In fact, harder to manage because I had to open up a new folder. So be careful about what you keep, why you're keeping it. Ask yourself the questions, just like it's a piece of paper. Am I going to use this in the near future? When was the last time I needed this? If you come across something later, if I keep this, what is it organized into? Kind of go through those motions and those steps to decide if you need to keep it or if you archive it. Next slide is about setting up archives. So now that you've sorted all your files and folders and decided what you need to keep, you set up your various archives for documents that you need to keep for future use, but you won't necessarily need every day. And archiving, typically, you have your files are available, but they're not right there. Whether they're cloud-based or in some kind of other area, but it's a way that you can not be cluttering up your inbox, your other folders. You have to create a reference system that works for you, and you can easily sort through later when you need to find something. But these are all different tools you can do to help manage your inbox and your emails. Let's go to the next slide, Chris. The key here is finding a system that works for you. I shared with you what works for me, which is in order to keep my inbox cleaner, I create subfolders, but I only save the stuff that I know I need for reference later, especially client materials or other stuff about my house that I know I'm going to need later until I sell the house, or tax information, stuff that you need to save for a while, just like paper. Some of the stuff I print and put in a paper folder if I need to share it with other members of my family or other members of my office. But for the most part, whatever system you have, as long as it works, as long as you don't get frustrated, cluttered with your inbox, you're able to manage your business, you're able to manage your personal life, and you can continue to be productive, that's what's most important. Just keep asking yourself questions like, where do I keep the information? Is it cloud-based? Is it on my computer? Is it a paper? Do I keep physical things or electronic? If I store the stuff, do I have space? There's limited space in systems and computers. Even sometimes we have external hard drives that we buy or use. I don't know if Embraer allows that, but there's certain ways that you may have limits on what you can save. And then do you have all the accesses needed, all the passwords, everything, however you want to do it? If you go to the next slide, Chris, I'll just spend a moment. You all can read this also, and I'll go through them a little bit. But I went in preparation for this class specifically, I went and just Googled other ideas of folks out there, from Warren Buffett to Steve Jobs to small solopreneurs, and just kind of took in a bunch of different points that I thought were pretty helpful and useful, and different ways that you can think about managing your email. One idea was convert your emails to a task as they first come in. This is actually taught through the Microsoft Outlook programs. Right when you first read it, focus on the task. If there's a task, set a task. Maybe it's not to be done right away, but create the task, and then you can delete the email. Choose a dedicated time for email. This is really hard in our day and age of working remote. Email is just as prevalent as somebody walking in your office or a face-to-face. But if you think about scheduling this one person recommended 3 to 4 times a day, focusing on email like they would a project. And that's how they manage their day. Explore other media when appropriate. We touched on this earlier. Not everything needs to be an email. Yes, it can be simpler and easier, but can it? Sometimes picking up the phone and having a dialogue is less time consuming, and more direct and more conclusive than emails back and forth that just continue to interrupt your day. Don't hide your unanswered messages in folders. We just talked about setting up folders. One of the reasons why I don't do a lot of the flags and those types of unread emails and folders anymore is because I'd lose them and forget them. And so I know that I personally don't have that ability to think that way, so that system doesn't work for me, but it did work for this person. It might work for you. So there's different ways that you can manage your inbox. Save your useful information and archive it. We talked about that. Use keywords so you can make threads more searchable. I will say this is a trick I use when I get emails that I know I'm going to need to search on later. I will change the subject line to a word, a keyword, or a phrase that I know goes in line with other types of work I'm doing. So if I'm working with Chris on various webinars, this is the fourth one we've done, I think, I will create in the subject header, I have a standard now, Ember Air webinar. And so I'm able to, if I ever need to search quickly on all the emails that Chris and I have done or had, I can just type in the search bar Ember Air webinar and up it comes. So it's a similar concept to just one word or one type of word, but it makes it easier for me to sort top to bottom and find what I need to find. And of course, delegate. Don't think of delegate as tell your subordinate what to do, but think of delegate as you've got an email that doesn't belong to you or you're really not something you can act on. Don't hold on to it and think about calling them back. If you don't work with vendors, forward that email to whoever works with vendors and then delete it. You don't need it anymore. That's delegating, is doing with it what you're supposed to do quickly. And then if you want to go to the next slide, Chris, I'm going to start wrapping us up. I think this was important to me to include for you because these are some processes we've talked about, from communication to civility and etiquette to managing your inbox and best practices and practical things. But it really comes down to discipline. It's finding something that works and doing it. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not an easy. It's one of those things where they say it's simple but not easy, right? Conceptually, it's pretty basic, but the process of doing it can be challenging. So if you go to the next slide, there's three slides I put in here that kind of might help to frame it up. Stay within your systems, find the right system, get your momentum, do it. It's like muscle memory. It's like the old Karate Kid movie with wax on, wax off. You kind of get used to doing it, and then there's reasons you do it, and it makes sense to do it. And once you find the system that works for you, you got to keep it up, and at the same time, not be afraid to update, tweak it, or if it stops working, even change it. I've changed my plans a few different times based on different companies I've worked with, different levels that I've worked at. So you want to be self-aware and be able to manage that part of it too. Next slide. Learn to say no. And I don't mean insubordinate no. This isn't a no, I'm busy kind of thing. But this is understanding that you can't do all things all the time or be all things to all people. So it's okay if you're overwhelmed and in many cases you're expected to say, I need a little bit more time, or I can work on this, but I also have this other project I'm working on. Which one do you think I should work on first? Now, sometimes it's both, and you have to learn to manage time, and that's just a function of us working in a corporation. But learning to your own strengths and what you can and can't do capability-wise will help you to, in a proper way, say, sorry, but I'm already committed to, or that area is not one of my strengths, or different ways that you can manage your emails. And then the last slide I want to get to is making it consistent. This goes back to the other slide, but whichever storage system you choose, however you choose to manage your emails, keep your methods consistent. The more you change, the more you think it's not working, or the more you try to do different things, the longer and harder it is to get to the right conclusion and to actually fix it. So come up with your process, try your process, find yourself making progress. Now, if it's not working, that's different, of course. But if it's working, you can tweak it, but find something that works and keep it going. So, Chris, that ends our webinar, and we're now up to questions, hopefully answers if we have them. So, back to you.
Sounds good. All right, guys. So what I'd like for you all to do is, if you have a question, why don't we try the raise your hands thing? I don't know if you all do that in Teams, but yeah, Christian, you have a question. Christian, take yourself off of mute and you can ask your question.
How about now? Does that work?
There we go.
All right. Sorry, too many buttons. Thank you very much for the great presentation, even with all the technology glitches. The one thing that jumped right up to me was, how do you keep, because this is starting to happen to me, how do you keep your task list from turning into your inbox, overcrowded inbox, if you just turn your emails into tasks and then delete your emails? Is it just kicking the can down the line?
Yeah, Christian, it can be, and that's a common concern. It's like the left pocket, right pocket. It's still in the same pair of pants.
Right.
And so if you've got all these emails, it goes back to using your task list as a tool, not as a replacement for, but as a tool to manage your inbox. And this is, we can get hour upon hour of this kind of training and real-time work and practical processes and practice. But that's really at its simplest form, which again is simple but not easy. It's you don't use your task list as a replacement for the inbox, much like I told you my story about using subfolders as a replacement for the inbox. It didn't solve anything. I mean, it certainly got rid of all my inbox emails, but I still had all the emails in different folders. So the process is when you look at your email, and you may have heard the do it, delegate it, destroy it process of paper, same kind of concept. If you see your email, you either do it, you have somebody else do it, you get rid of it, or you put it in that box for later, and then you have to have the discipline to not let it get out of hand. I wish I could give you like this magic potion or a trick for emptying an inbox, but if you really think about how it got there, it's because we didn't manage it at the time when we got it. So understanding that there's a clutter issue and an organizational issue and a practical issue of responding and then really literally just throwing stuff away you don't need, that might help.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
All right, what other questions do we have out there? If you have a question, just go to the top of the screen. You see the little hand that looks like it's up. You just click that, raise your hand, and I can call on you. I'm not seeing anybody else raising their hands here. And I did see somebody had asked if we could share the presentation afterwards. Yeah, Alan, as long as you don't mind, I'd be happy to share that with the group.
Absolutely. If you don't mind saving it as a PDF first, that'd be great. But yeah,
most definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Christian, you get one question. Sorry.
Dang it.
No, go right ahead.
Well, no, I another comment, not so much of a question, but a comment that, and Alan, I don't know, I'm one of the in-house lawyers, so
Gotcha.
Emails for me is,
yeah.
But one of the things that I really appreciated you saying was, when you're at the beginning of the presentation was, email is written communication. You still should use the same formalities most of the time, and including checking spelling and things like that. Are there any tools that you can recommend for automatic spell checking or something like that, especially with today's technology?
Right, it becomes a challenge. I know I've run into personally, and also other people on my team. So something like an Excel spreadsheet you might attach doesn't have a great capability for spell check, where PowerPoint is marginal and Word is supposed to be better. What I have found so personally helpful, I'd love to hear from the floor too. I found personally helpful in what we teach on and what we coach on is 3 reviews. There's one as you're writing it. Well, there's 4 if you count that. There's as you're writing it, you allow Word to do their spell check. You reread it, and then or your Outlook do their own spell check. You reread it, and then you also read it out loud. So those are the 4 pieces. There are really 3 checks. There's the auto spell. I don't know of another tool that does a better job than whatever your computer already has, as long as it's turned on. There's the rereading yourself. And I guess you could do another one. We don't recommend doing this because it just takes too much time, but having somebody else read it first, which I guess if we were dealing with something as specific as a legal doc or something that would be potentially part of an internal need, it would be helpful to have someone else read it. But yeah, Christian, when I think about those, that's what we teach on. And there's so many potential tools out there, but you can go crazy trying to think about what else there is.
Yeah, I use not so much for the attachments, but for the email itself. I know that Outlook has a function that says automatically spell check when you hit send, and that saved me a couple of times.
It does. It's also spelled stuff. It also misses things that are spelled correctly but aren't contextually correct. So you're exactly right. And forgive me, I should have been more. Yes, you want that turned on so that your spell check is caught. You want to go into your system settings and ensure that your spell check that you have for Outlook, for example, or Word or whatever tool is what you need it to be. So make sure the Canadian spell is off unless you're in Canada. Make sure that you can turn on or off. It can flag words with numbers in them, which if you're doing a lot of website typing, you might want to turn off because it can also create too much flag that you don't need. So there's those moving pieces. I agree with you on that one, Christian. And I think also, I'm glad you mentioned your role in the company, because we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the how deep we can really get on communication. We in human resources and in the legal world and in employment law, especially inside the company, there are different types of communication you have to be even more aware of. You also, if you're communicating, let's say, with a client on a proposal or a potential client on a proposal. So there are different areas of the types of communication we do that for each group you want to be extra careful about too. That's a whole other thing, Chris, we might do.
Yeah, that
Thanks for that,
definitely be
Christian. I
another
appreciate
topic.
that framing. Yeah.
Sure thing.
All right, any other questions out there for Alan? If you can still see my screen, can everybody see the QR code that's up now?
Yes.
All right, so we always like to have your feedback. So if you'd like to use this QR code and you haven't used this before, just open up the camera on your phone and aim it like you're going to take a picture of this. The survey will automatically pop open. Give us your feedback. Let us know what topics you'd like to see in the future. We're always looking for new topics. And if this isn't working for you, if you prefer not to do this on your phone, not a problem. I'm going to be sending out the link after the session to do the post-session survey. And in that, I'll add in the PDF of the PowerPoint that we went through today. But I would definitely like to thank Alan for being here with us today. Again, it's nice to have you back. Alan, your information's up on the screen, so if anybody would like to email Alan or give him a call, here's his information. And yeah, so thank you very much for being here. Thank you all for being on the session today. Thanks for working through the technical challenges with us. And hope you have a wonderful Friday and an even better weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Chris, I'm still on. Are you still on? Hey there, I was just about to dial you.
How's it going?
Oh, man.